Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our guest today will be New York Dore as we talk about Vanderbilt's 4-0 baseball week. Before we get to him, we thank our sponsor, Wellspire, Nashville's Learning and Development Center. Wellspire offers personal and professional development opportunities in a beautiful facility in the Gulch neighborhood. Stop by for an event with world-renowned speakers or host an off-site event that will wow your team or your clients. We thank our co-sponsor, the Well Coffee House, which turns coffee into water and has a mission to bring clean water to the world. A news today presented by Sutherland & Belk, a Nashville-based injury law firm. Sutherland & Belk is committed to fighting for those who've been injured in car, motorcycle, and truck accidents. Check them out at sbinjurylaw.com. Vanderbilt takes on Lipscomb in baseball. First pitch 6:30 at First Tennessee Park on Tuesday night. New York Dore joins us on today's podcast. We will talk about Vanderbilt's sweep of Florida in pretty spectacular fashion, as well as maybe the week ahead. New York Dore, thank you for joining me today. How have you been, sir?
Been good. I think last week I said perhaps that my weekend clearly wasn't bad as the Vandy boys. Well, this past weekend actually was a good weekend for me, but I don't know if it could have been better than a 34-4 sweep of Florida.
Yeah, I just did not like the way they looked coming into this series. I didn't think they hit the ball particularly well, although they did hit some balls hard at First Tennessee where it just does not carry due to the power alleys, which were they don't label them, and I guess that's for a reason because Tim Corbin said they were 390. So there was that, and then I just did not like the way they finished Game 2 against A&M. I didn't like the way they played Game 3, period. But, man, I guess playing the Gators is the wake-up call.
Yeah, and, the A&M Game 3, it's not a foreign story. It was a story of a kid throws a little softer, good movement on the ball, and just is hitting his spots down in the zone and pitching to the black rather than either the middle of the plate or off the plate, not walking people and getting soft contact. The bats were listless on Sunday and at Bluebell. First Tennessee, no streaming, so I wasn't watching, listened to a bit of it and, saw Twitter feeds and game tracker. And my understanding is that the ball was really, really squared up several times, especially in the first couple of innings, with basically nothing to show for it because balls dying on the track, or more accurately, balls traveling, but the track being way too far back. I don't think we know exactly what to think going into Friday, other than the fact that we were facing 3 premium caliber arms, guys that aren't having necessarily the best season, but it's a Florida lineup you're going to face. Florida pitching staff is a lot like Vanderbilt's pitching staff from year to year. You're going to have a series of at least 10 guys who are going to go in the top 5 rounds on each roster pretty much every year. Maybe that's overstating a little bit, but not by much. And that's what we saw this weekend. And you saw Vanderbilt come to play in a really big way. And particularly it was a Vanderbilt-Florida series. And just like Vanderbilt-Florida, Vanderbilt-Tennessee, those games get chippy. There's a lot on the line, a lot of pride on both dugouts, and a lot of chirping in the stands, particularly in Nashville. Florida's fan base tends to be a little bit weird. They're not as active, involved, and they don't tend to show out quite as much. But it was all of those things this weekend, with the exception that one team was on the giving side and the other team was really receiving the entire weekend. The emphatic trouncing on Game 2 Friday and Game 3 Saturday was really something to behold.
Did you get to see what precipitated the Harrison Ray stuff? I did not catch what happened at the end of Game 2. I know that he got hit all 3 times. I know that I think there was a stolen base in there that may have opened
and that's
a
what
wound.
I listened to your podcast yesterday, and I know that he did identify Harry stealing up 8 on Friday as a possible precipitation there, and they were really throwing inside on Harrison. And there was one in particular, I can't recall if it was early Saturday or late Friday, where I did take note, and it seemed a little curious to me watching on TV that the home plate ump actually jumped out in front of Harrison to make sure he wasn't going to react, which Harrison didn't, to his credit. But at least, the umpire must have identified some sort of growing tension and chippiness. But that's part of the way things play. And to be frank, of all the things, the hit by pitches are one thing. The whatever Harry did, stealing a base up 8. I would say to them, have you seen some of the results from our bullpen early in the year? I don't think we regard an 8-run lead as safe until it's 2 outs in the 9th. With Tyler Brown on the hill. But, the most unacceptable thing that happened over the weekend was someone going spikes up. Even if they're, rubber spikes on turf shoes, you don't go spikes up into someone at second base. And from that perspective, I would think Harry probably has a lot more to be pissed about than anyone on the Florida side. We just go back to our hashtag of sit down Sully.
Yeah, I think getting hit by 3 pitches and nearly spiked is plenty. Yes.
To be fair, on Saturday rather, Harrison also did give some comeuppance because he fouled the ball off of Kevin O'Sullivan in the Florida dugout. So, I think Harry takes the last laugh both on that foul ball and also on the scoreboard all weekend.
Yeah, and I think if people did not hear the Monday podcast with Dave Serrano, Dave made an excellent point. And Dave, by the way, genuinely really nice and good guy. Really enjoyed spending time with him this weekend. And I think he had a great point on this because I was thinking it too. And you said it, with the bullpen, you just never know if the lead is safe. And so in some ways it was respect to Florida. Of course, if you're in that other dugout, you're going to take it whatever way it motivates your team. But anyway, we could go on about that, but we won't because we have other things to discuss. I want to rewind and go back to Mason Hickman's outing against Belmont because I thought he was tremendous. Now, I'm not saying the umpiring was bad because I did not think it was, but certainly the outside of the plate, the corners were in play. He took advantage of that. He struck out 12 guys. I am thinking now, okay, you're still a little worried about Patrick Raby throwing strikes, but my goodness, nobody can lay a bat on the kid. So I don't know if it's effective wildness or what you would call it, but it's not hurting him at this point. You have Fellows rebounded and look much better than he has in a while. You had Kumar Rocker throw pretty well again, and now add Mason Hickman to that. If you can get your starters into the 6th inning and beyond, yes, the bullpen is still a question outside of Tyler Brown, but you have suddenly very much minimized what those guys have to do. If what we saw last week is indicative of how these guys pitch going forward.
I sort of take issue that everyone sort of accepted after last year that Patrick Raby is something other than the guy who had the best results on Team USA 20 months ago. I think people discount his effectiveness. This is a guy with a career 2.66 ERA who's given up 209 hits and 263 and 2/3 innings. That's a .221 batting average against. He's given up a total there of 16 home runs, 6 were last year, 2 triples both last year, 32 doubles, 11 last year. So if you take out and accept that last year, things weren't right for him, he had an ankle injury that really hampered his landing foot throughout the year. That's what I understand. He had a .271 batting average against, gave up far more extra base hits last year than he otherwise had in his career. If you take that out, you're looking at an all-time Vandy great. I mean, this is a guy who, as a freshman, was 7-1 with a 2.61 ERA, a .174 batting average against. As a sophomore, 10-4, 2.73 ERA, 2.31 batting average against. This year, 4-0, .57 ERA, 1.52 batting average against. This is an elite pitcher. And I think people discount that just because he doesn't throw 93, 94 in the first inning doesn't mean that he's not elite and that he can't do things, even when he's walking people. And let's be honest, his walk rate has gone up. So as a freshman, he walked 19 in about 60 innings. As a sophomore, it was 30 in about 105. So he was pretty consistent with his control from a pure walk perspective. In that time period, he struck out more people as a freshman than he did in any other year. But this year he's already up to 18 walks and 31 2/3. Granted, 4 of those were in one inning this past weekend, which he somehow ended up unscathed in. But, coming back to the core point, this is a guy who, he had a crummy year last year. It wasn't fully right. The velo was down. We all sort of knew that something was off. But if you look at the balance of his career, this is a guy who's right up there with Carson Fulmer and Kyle Wright and Walker Buehler as the kids who have had the best comprehensive, 3 or 4 year careers as principally starters in Vanderbilt history. And that, all of that subset of, 4 individuals, you kind of have to question whether it's appropriate to put Walker in there, because Walker was predominantly a midweek guy for the first 2 years of his career. But, those guys are right up there with Kevin Ziomek and I guess Sonny Gray too, as having, the most stellar, consistent careers as dominating starters on this Vanderbilt staff. Tyler Beatty as well would be one you'd put in there. Whereas if you look throughout the rest of even David Price did not have a great sophomore season. And really his body of work was largely in his junior year. These are guys, 4 or 5 guys who have consistently been excellent for a prolonged period in the starting rotation. And Patrick Raby's numbers, at least his numbers, maybe not the strikeouts, but his numbers are every bit as good as those other guys. And he's not going to be a first rounder. He doesn't touch 93. If there's a guy on the staff who's likely to have fewer strikeouts than innings pitched, it's him. And yes, you also have to wonder, can you keep up a BABIP of, I'm guessing his BABIP, batting average on balls in play, is somewhere around 100 right now. That's not sustainable, even if you're not getting barreled up, which he's not. But the numbers speak for themselves throughout his career. This is a guy who had the best numbers on the Team USA staff 2 summers ago. This is a real deal guy, and just because he doesn't throw hard, I think people should not be discounting that. And I think I've been saying that consistently for 2 years. He doesn't look like some of the frontline starters we've had in the past. Frankly, I think my biggest criticism of him as sort of ace 1B is that he uses too many pitches to get deep into a game. And one thing you would like to see from someone with a 152 batting average against who doesn't strike out a lot of guys is more 1, 2, 3 pitch at bats and fewer of the 6, 7, 8, which goes to your point to the issue of control. And that's really where he's suffering, is less in runs against and more in how deep he can get into a game. He did get 6 innings this week. I think he got 6 innings. He did get 6 innings out of at the TAMU start when he was very good against Texas A&M as well. But he's not a guy who's going to go and give you eight innings because, quite frankly, his pitch count's going to be too high too fast.
Well, not just that, and I don't know that this is black and white, but I don't know that he's got a true put-away pitch either, so there's also that. But I was also amazed when people last year, when he came back, said, that's no big deal, we don't need him, those sorts of things. I was like, okay, go back and look at his first 2 years. It was clear to me that something was not right with him last year. I would not be surprised if there's a return to form as a senior, and of course that's what we're seeing. But I want to move along because we've got a limited time. I saw Drake Fellows from behind the plate. I thought he looked really good. I thought he also got some help from Philip Clark. I want to talk about that in a second. But what was your evaluation of Drake Fellows watching from TV?
Yeah, he was fantastic. He had, it's always harder to tell when you're just watching on TV what someone's velocity is, and based on pure numbers, because the guns are hot on TV. They show 2-3 miles an hour faster than it is. But he was popping 94, 96 on the guns. My understanding is scouts in the stands had him at 93 on stalker guns, touching 94. But you could tell from the swings and the results that the fastball was better. The command wasn't the best we've seen from Drake, but he also was using his slider appropriately and well. And I almost go back again to, we talked last weekend a little bit about it, the use of the slider. Sonny Gray, in an interview when he got to Cincinnati, talked about criticism of how his slider was used in New York, that they wanted him to throw sliders for strikes. And he said, when he tries to do that, it's just a spinning pitch that gets pounded. And his ideal use of the slider is a put away pitch in the dirt. And for Drake, that's the pitch he had working on Thursday, and he was getting into counts that he could throw that. And to be frank, the takeaway to me on Florida on Friday was they could not recognize that pitch. They were really, really swinging at balls in the dirt. I think there was some of that also on Thursday or on Friday and Saturday as well with Pat's curve, not with everyone, but Pat's curve and also Kumar's curve or slider. I thought he was impressive. He threw strikes. He controlled the count. I thought there was absolutely fantastic pitch selection from Brownie, especially late in the game when we got to the 7th, 8th, and 9th innings, where you're at a point where you've got a lead. Your starter is in control, and you're trying to extend his outing so you can reserve that pen. Once it became clear that Drake was in the ballpark to go 8 innings entering the 7th, or 9 innings entering the 8th, Brownie was calling for a change that was getting soft contact or fastballs up and getting fly balls to Blade. He was able to engineer, I think, possibly the three most efficient innings that Drake had were the 7th, 8th, and 9th. And that's just a nightmare for an opposition that hasn't gotten anything off of Drake, but he was able to find the zone. He was in a groove, and he was forcing 1, 2, and 3 pitch at bats, and that's what got him through the game. And then I think it was 105, 110 pitches, and really I thought the last 3, were extraordinarily well called by Brownie. I said last week they're very well paid for the criticism, but you got to give them credit when it's due. And along the same route, I think Mike Baxter took a lot of flack last year for strikeout rates, and you've got to give him a lot of credit for the development of this lineup, and not just guys like Blade or Austin Martin, who are generational talents for most colleges as far as the ability to barrel up balls. And maybe generational is maybe a little bit of a strong statement, but these are all SEC caliber hitters. But you look at the progression year over year, the improvement, not just in guys like, say, Ethan Paul, who's finally realizing his talent, Stephen Scott, who's gone from being a big bat to being a really comprehensive hitter and doing so earlier in the year than he has in the past. Reminder about Stephen Scott, all 3 years of his Vanderbilt career, he's teared it up when the weather's warm and been mediocre when it's cold out. And that was reflected by being the best hitter in the NECBL 3 years ago, second best hitter in the Cape League 2 years ago, and being just an absolute behemoth in the playoff run last year. So this is a kid who's having those types of results now early in the year. Lord knows what he's going to look like in June. But I look at Baxter and the job he's done, and I see it most in guys like Jason Gonzalez or Harry Ray, or to be frank, even though the results haven't come through, and working with Julian Infante, all 3 of those guys in particular are people who really have improved their approaches. And along those lines, I think a lot of credit is due to Brownie for this weekend. He had the pitching staff looking phenomenal, and really a lot of credit to him is due. He called great games all 3 days. Florida looked really off their game. They looked a little better on Saturday. facing, ironically, the best stuff that Vanderbilt had to throw at them. But generally speaking, it was it'd be hard to find a much better weekend than Vanderbilt did have.
Couple things that weren't talked about a lot this weekend. First of all, the strikeouts. The offense strikes out 19 times. Granted, that was only 24 innings because Vanderbilt didn't hit it in the ninth, but with a team that has had problems striking out, not as much this year, but certainly the past 3 or 4 leading in against a pitching staff with elite talent. And by the way, Florida's 3 starters were plenty experienced. They threw a lot of big innings last year, so that's something to note. The other thing that I don't think got talked about a lot, York Dore, Philip Clark has really come on as a catcher. I think that he threw a runner out by a mile in the first game. Don't remember what inning, but it was fairly early. Florida stole 1 base the rest of the weekend, and I think that was its only other attempt. I like the way he's controlling the running game. I also think he's gotten really good at framing pitches, and I think he stole some strikes, especially some strike threes for his pitchers this weekend.
I'm going to say that Frederick Douglass is someone who's starting to get a lot of recognition, because that was a very Trumpian, nobody's talking about this because I've talked about it twice on your podcast this year, that the thing that has impressed me the most about the progression year over year is the improvement in Philip Clark defensively, and in particular, if you're able to watch a game on TV or streaming, watch how he moves his glove and the strikes he steals. And that was something we really suffered from last year when Stephen Scott was predominantly the catcher, and when Phil was there, he wasn't as good a defender last year as he is now. But Scotty had a cannon of an arm. He couldn't run on him, but he was giving away those sort of borderline strikes because he couldn't command the glove in the same way that we're more used to with Jason DeLay. To be frank, I think Phil Clark this year is probably the best at framing since maybe Spencer Navin. If you look at how he actually works the glove, he knows, what pitches you do it on and what pitches you don't. He's probably not as good at blocking balls as, say, a DeLay. He tends to struggle on some of the balls that are well outside of his domain, which unfortunately, given our wildness as a pitching staff, there are a lot of those, and those are really tough balls to handle. But I think his year over year has just been phenomenal. I think David Macias is the primary catching coordinator for the staff. I'd have to be double checking that to confirm, but whoever it is, I should say, deserves a tremendous amount of credit, as clearly also Phil Clark does, because he demonstrably put in hours and hours and hours of work in the off season, becoming the catcher he is today, because he wasn't this catcher last year. And I think, to be frank, he's made himself a tremendous amount of money in this upcoming draft by doing so, even if he continues to sort of hit 270, 280, which is not a good result for as good a hitter he is.
Yeah, you get props on that. You have made the call on his defense since early in the year, which is what got me to noticing, and indeed, a lot of those things showed up. One more thing for you before we get to the mailbag. Boy, the lineup this weekend was just fantastic. I was going through and trying to select a player of the week on the weekend rewind thing that I do, and I went with Stephen Scott because I think his numbers were the best over the course of the weekend. Plus, he had the biggest momentum-changing hit in that pivotal Game 3 where they were down early. But it strikes me as I look through the box scores, the first 8 guys in the lineup really through the course of the weekend hit well. Now, you might have an 0 for 4 or an 0 for 5 somewhere, but whoever does that seemed to come back with 2 hits and a walk the next day. I don't know what caught your eye with the lineup, because just so many guys hit well that, other than Scott, none of them really stood out to me. But was there anything that you noticed with the hitters this weekend of significance?
Other than Ethan Paul continues to have just a monster junior year. It was surprising that on Saturday he really didn't produce much of anything because it seems like every time we have a big offensive output, he's somewhere central to it. His RBI total is already approaching his career high, and we're somewhere around the halfway point of the season. I think there was some question as to how would Vanderbilt respond to Pat DeMarco being out of the lineup, and our understanding is that Pat was not on the weekend roster. It is an injury situation. We do not know what that injury is. We don't think it's a dramatically bad one, but there's no word on whether or not he'll be ready back for tonight's Tuesday game or for this upcoming weekend. But with Pat out, we're exposed in that arguably our top, other than Austin Martin, right-handed bat was going to be out of the lineup. I think Harry Ray did a very good job this weekend filling that role in the sixth slot in the order ahead of Ethan. He had a couple of really big hits. He had a big double on Saturday. Obviously stole a base, had the big foul ball off of Sully. So he had a good weekend. But the thing that worked out well with that was Florida is not a left-handed dominating staff. And to be frank, their lefties really didn't have any effect. They were all out of the bullpen. And there was one who appeared to be a lefty specialist who came in on I can't recall if it was a Thursday or Friday game, but came in to face Blade and Scott and walked both of them in one of our big innings.
Jordan Butler is who you're talking about.
Correct.
Who was a good pitcher for them last year.
Yeah, and clearly was the guy who was supposed to get out lefties. And to be frank, it's really hard to get Blade and Scott out. And the other thing, I would note, just Blade's home run on Saturday was a thing to watch, and you wish just for a moment that you could be as good at swinging a bat as JJ Bleday is for just one at bat, and just to have that sort of sweet feeling of knowing that you've gotten absolutely all of a pitch, enjoying it, putting your head down for a second, and then sneaking back up to see how far it actually goes. And that ball was somewhere off the light tower, but that was impressive.
Let's go to the mailbag, which is sponsored by Vanderbilt fan and independent insurance agent Josh Minton of Brentwood. Are you in the market for auto, motorcycle, home, renters, or landlord insurance? Do you need life or commercial insurance? Call Josh. That number is 615-933-1979. Email him at josh@hqinsurance.com. Follow him on Facebook at facebook.com/JD Minton HQ. He's my insurance agent. I hope you will make him yours. Now, you've answered part of this already with Clark, but VU65 asks, do you think that DeMarco or Clark are likely to be drafted high enough to go pro as draft-eligible sophomores based on the years they are having? DeMarco is batting .237 and Clark .260.
Yeah, I don't think the batting average matters at all. I think that of the two, that DeMarco probably is more likely to return. I would expect that Phil Clark's going to get a substantial offer to move on. He is obviously not the best catcher in the draft. Everyone is a good bit behind Adley Rutschman out at Oregon State, who is the overall number one pick in this draft, being chased really only by Bobby Witt Jr. But Phil Clark, I don't know exactly how to peg where he is, but he came into this year as sort of Phil Clark PC professional hitter. Oh, by the way, happy birthday to Philip. Today is his birthday, and I believe that's correct. Yesterday was the birthday of Pete Crow Armstrong, the outfielder we discussed at the end of last week's podcast. So happy birthday to both of them. But Phil came into the year as largely a kid who just looks like a professional hitter, and a kid who should have a hit tool that plays throughout, single A, double A, triple A, and possibly the big leagues. He just looks in control of the plate at all times. But what he was lacking was frankly a position. And this is a guy who couldn't win the catching job outright last year, and he put in a tremendous amount of work, and looks every bit the part of a person whose catching skills will progress to being a competent, big league catcher. His throwing has been outstanding. His receiving has been outstanding. And frankly, we're in an era where I forget who it is, Chris, but there's some catcher out there who, I don't remember if it was with Mariners, some West Coast team, I think, who hits like 180, 190, and he just got signed to a nice fancy deal because he's as good as it gets at framing. And that's really where Phil has earned a lot, and then where people will take notice of both the hard work and also the talent. And I think he'll be going, somewhere in probably day 2. And I would expect he would depart. Wouldn't foreclose the possibility of him coming back another year. I will note that I would expect Tyler Duvall to come back next year. He's a draft eligible junior. He had a really nice weekend, had a 3-hit day on Friday. Does nothing but hit line drives, even though his production this year has not been through the roof, but a good kid who'll be able to catch. Dom Keegan will be back as a sophomore next year. He'll be able to catch. We got a couple of catchers in their recruiting class. But Phil Clark, I would expect to go in the draft. With DeMarco, he hasn't had the start to the year that I think a lot of people expected, particularly me. And I still feel quite confident that he's going to finish this year very strong if healthy. I think he's got all the swagger in the world and confidence to really execute at this level. And his issue is perhaps, he doesn't play a premium position because he is, he's frankly a left fielder playing center field for Vanderbilt. Good speed, not elite speed. Good coverage, not elite coverage. Good arm, not elite arm. His hit tool is good, not great. His power tool is good, not great, maybe very good. His intangibles are good, not great. I think there'd probably be some criticism over swing length, which I think is more of a look issue than a performance issue. So I think things are a little less certain for Pat. I think he certainly could go as a draft eligible sophomore, but if I had to guess, I would think that unless he really tears up the second half and makes a significant impression on scouts, that we would see him come back for a junior year.
Yeah, and batting average will not be the standard by which those guys are judged hitting-wise. It'll be more on base and slugging, and it'll be more of an evaluation of their games as pros and the holes in it. But I'm with you on that. I don't think that DeMarco's contact rate has been good enough. You have an injury now. Sometimes that just has the seeds for a season that's going to be tough to get by. In other words, if the injury lingers and he's already having trouble making contact, maybe this just be kind of an off year for him. We'll see. Hope to see him healthy soon and back to form, but just something to consider. Last question. VU Basketball 1 asks, do you think any of the other guys have a shot, or any of Vanderbilt's players have a shot at the Golden Spikes Award, or is that still already got Andrew Vaughn's name engraved on it?
So Adley Rushman is now basically square, if not ahead of Vaughn. Rushman gets the benefit of playing a competent catching role at a premium position versus Vaughn, who's basically a short first baseman. So he's not getting any accolades on the defensive side of the ball. And to be frank, Adley's offensive numbers are right there with Vaughn's. I wouldn't pitch to either of them. And, if you were looking at who theoretically could enter the conversation, I think there's probably a good chance that we see J.J. Bleday as a, maybe not a finalist. I don't think he's going to have the numbers to be a finalist, but potentially as a semifinalist for the Golden Spikes. I think that it certainly also wouldn't. There are a number of bats that would not be outrageous if they were to jump up into that position. That would include, Stephen Scott and Austin Martin for one, or for two, I should say. But yeah, I mean, if you're looking for who's the all-star on this team, who's the face of the team this year, it's JJ Bleday, and justifiably so. He can do everything. He's gonna be, at this point, I think he's, if the draft were held today, I think he's a top 15 pick, which I didn't anticipate coming into the season. I sort of had him pegged as, okay, he's going to be one of the first outfielders in college bats, but probably not going to be in the first half of the first round or the second half of the first round. I think he could be one of the first handful of college bats taken after Rush and Vaughn, and that says something. I mean, he just looks fantastic. Everything that you'd want to check the box on, he checks the box. So, possibly Bleday. And if we turn around, in June, beginning of June into May, and Pat Raby is 12-0 with a .57 ERA. Yeah, he's in the mix for a Golden Spikes finalist role as well. I don't think anyone expects that the aberrational ERA is going to hold up, but he's certainly capable of having an all SEC type season.
He is New York Dore. I'm Chris Lee, the host of the Vandy Sports Podcast. Appreciate you listening. New York Dore, thank you for your time, and we look forward to catching you next week.
Absolutely, and just as one last point, with the basketball turbulence that has gone on, I think it's acceptable for people, and people should remember that it's okay to both like Bryce Drew, like how he led the program, and to accept the fact that the results on the court, if they didn't dictate this, they certainly weighed heavily towards making a change. So, you can support both Malcolm Turner as well as Bryce Drew in this move and their future endeavors. Also, it has turned out that Stephanie White apparently will be back next year, which I think surprised some. I have no comment on that. I don't have any real comment on the women's basketball program, but just do want to say, as I expressed to Bryce on Twitter, thank him for his 3 years. I think he led this team, led this program very well and very honorably. From all reports and accounts, I think he was extraordinarily likable. Would I have made this move? I don't know all the facts. I probably wouldn't have this year, but I also fully support Malcolm Turner, and I think we can all agree that Tim Brando is a jackass.
New York Dore, thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next week.
Thank you.